My name is Jaden Wang, and I'm a rising junior at Oakton High School, and I am one of your hosts for today.
My name is Jessica Wong. I'm a rising sophomore at TJ, and I'm also one of your hosts for today.
And my name is Emily Wang. I'm a rising junior at Riverhill High School, and I am your last host for today. We are part of the program BranchOut, which is a nonprofit program with Veritas education leaders that was co-founded by Dr. Yushin Wu and Mr. Richard Wang in 2015 and grew from 20 student volunteers to over 150 student volunteers in 4 short summers. Our high school student mentors come from over 40 different schools across 4 states.
We started as a pure STEM mentoring program working at community centers, homeless shelters, and county semi-credit recovery programs, and have expanded into community outreach programs to promote cross-cultural understanding by featuring community heroes, creating research articles, and organizing career panels. As an award-winning community engagement program, we have received endorsement from U.S. Congress, including Senator Tim Kaine and former Congressman Barbara Comstock. Additionally, our innovator program won the U.S. Congressional App Challenge Award last year.
As part of BranchOut's goals to promote civic engagement, community, and STEAM education, we are so excited to be presenting this very informative career panel. The journalism industry will and always has been an important part of our modern society. One of our featured panelists who will be speaking for us tonight is Mr. Trevor Baratko. Mr. Baratko is the editor-in-chief of the Virginia-based Loudoun Times-Mirror and LoudounTimes.com. The newspaper is delivered to 35,000 households in Loudoun County each week, while the daily website is read by more than 300,000 people each month. Mr. Baratko has served as the top editor since 2018. Before that, he was a managing editor and reporter, during which he focused on local government and politics. Mr. Baratko has won numerous accolades from the Virginia Press Association, including for Best News Presentation, feature writing, column writing, and headline writing, among others.
Our second speaker for today will be Asra Normani. Ms. Normani is a former Wall Street Journal reporter who taught journalism at Georgetown University. She's an internationally acclaimed journalist and author born in India and raised in Morgantown, West Virginia, in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. Before starting at the Wall Street Journal at the age of 23, she was among the first Asians hired at the journal. Ms. Normani covered issues of politics, culture, and business. One of her most notable projects was the Pearl Project, an investigation into the kidnapping and murder of Wall Street Journal reporter Daniel Pearl. With an MA in International Communications from American University, Ms. Normani has been a cultural trainer to the military, US State Department, and law enforcement, teaching Americans how to navigate cultures with not only competency, but growth. In the same way as a mother and school volunteer at Thomas Jefferson High School for the Science and Technology, she mentors youth to find their passions, nurtures their talents, and express their voices with strength and wisdom. She speaks to audiences around the globe, advocating for press freedoms, women's rights, human rights, critical thinking, and finally, grace.
We are thrilled to have you all with us this evening, and I'm sure you will all provide excellent information regarding the industry for all of us. Audience members will have the opportunity to ask questions for our panelists at the end. So I know at the beginning of our panel, before we formally started, you guys were already talking about your background as a journalist. But why did you decide to become a journalist, and exactly when and how did you recognize your passion for journalism?
So I can start, Trevor. There's 2 words, Nancy Drew. So I don't know if you all are fans of Nancy Drew, but I was a little girl that came to America from India. I was 4 years old. So I'm as old as your parents, but as a generation, I'm more like your generation, not to try to, be something that I'm not. But I came when I was 4, and so it was like a lot of you, I was the translator of America for my parents. And so when I came at 4, I was English as second language, free and reduced, meals. I was having free breakfast at Martin Luther King Elementary School in Piscataway, New Jersey. And I just didn't understand Christmas gift exchanges. I didn't understand Halloween. These were not things that we did back home in India. And so my best friend became Nancy Drew. And with Nancy Drew, I found somebody who was just like me, like somebody who had this insatiable curiosity and didn't really take no for an answer, and just was obsessed, right? Obsessed with solving mysteries. And so that's what drove me into the mindset of being a journalist. And then later I had to learn how to be a journalist, but I'll be really curious to see if Trevor was a Hardy Boy or not?
Not quite, but there are definitely kind of some similarities and parallels there, in that it was reading. It was really a love of reading that got me into it and turned me I guess just kind of into a love of reading and writing, and therefore I kind of morphed into a love of journalism and newspapers. Originally kind of wanted to be a sports writer because I was a big sports geek growing up, and then my interests evolved and kind of grew a bit the older I got. I will say, I wish I was an avid reader earlier, so that is kind of a bit of guidance or suggestions I would give to everybody. Preach reading and start reading as early as possible. I know most of the folks on here are already at an age where they're probably reading volumes and volumes each week, but whether it's young family members or kids or friends' kids, start reading and preach reading as early as possible, because I wish I was a bigger reader at a young age. But yeah, once I really kind of started getting into reading and writing in high school, I basically never looked back and knew that I wanted to pursue a career in journalism. And like Asra said, the rest came later. The nuts and bolts and kind of the technical aspect and knowing the kind of tenets of journalism, came in college and even early on in the career, when you have some good editors that hammer that home into you. But one of my, rather than Nancy Drew, Mitch Albom, who, if anybody's read Tuesdays with Morrie, I think that Mitch Albom was a former sports writer. I don't know if he is still a sports writer, but anyways, his famous book, Tuesdays with Morrie, I think that was the first one where, knowing he was a sports writer, but he was also such a brilliant writer, and that was such a touching book, that really hooked me. That probably was it. I was a goner after reading that. Sorry.
You just reminded me that, even when I was a girl, then I was reading, and then it was in 7th grade, growing up in Morgantown, West Virginia, that my English teacher, Mrs. Alke, was starting this new innovative program in English class, and she was going to teach us journal writing. So you guys, this was the 1970s, and it just wasn't a thing. And so I wrote into my journal, I wrote my dreams and my hopes and the fact that I loved this cops motorcycle show called Chips. It was redone then, right? And my kickball team fantasies. And then one day my journal was missing. And I was like, oh no, where is it? My journal with all my secrets. And sure enough, it was laid out again one day, and somebody had written in pencil, "We read everything that you wrote, and we know your secrets," like no big secrets. But it was at that moment that I kind of thought, like, okay, I got to write for public consumption. So it's like such a small little moment as a child, as a girl, but it became the idea that, like, okay, take the writing and take it out of just like journal for myself, but for everyone.
Yeah, that can be agonizing too. I think we both view, I'm sure we both view our writing, anything that is going to see the light of day, you just agonize over every sentence, and sometimes the clock's up and you can't agonize anymore. We go to press for our print edition on Thursday morning, so that was this morning, and I put off my editorial until the last second, and that is, you're coming down on the final hour, and you definitely have to get to a place where you're never going to be 100% in love with everything you write. If you are, just call it quits and retire. You want to kind of craft it the best you can and get it as, you have to kind of leave well enough alone and get it as good as you can, and then just send it off and keep working at it and get better the next day. So that's kind of how I view it, because you'll just drive yourself crazy if you always want to go back for one more revision. Take your time, put care and love, honestly, into your work, but at some point you have to just put it out there.
Yeah, it's really inspiring to hear how like a love of reading and like writing, journaling led to like you guys becoming journalists. So also along those lines, especially relative to now, so how do you guys feel that the pandemic has affected journalism or like your respective focuses, what you report on or and like the communities that you reach out to?
Wow. You know, so what happened for me is that I ended up going into journalism despite my father's every dream that I'd become a physician, right? Like every good Asian kid. And the one thing that I did learn were the skills, right? The skills of the field, building rapport, interviewing. You know, these are things that came naturally to me. I really like to talk to people. And then, of course, the writing craft is a craft that you have to do on your own anyway. But really, with the pandemic, as you can imagine, you all see the stereotypes of journalists. Like we've got our notebook out in front of people, we've got our microphone, whatever it may be. And all of a sudden, the pandemic did to us like everything that it's done to you all. Like it requires the social distancing, it requires us to stay at home, and so for me. A really just crazy thing happened in the first weeks of the pandemic. You all had mentioned, Jaden, at the beginning that one of the projects that I ended up working on as an adult was the investigation into the kidnapping and murder of this dear colleague that I'd had at the Wall Street Journal, Daniel Pearl. And so poor Danny, he becomes like a story of the casualties of war and conflict with journalists laying their lives down. He was a reporter after the 9/11 attack in Karachi, Pakistan, and I was there too. And militants in Pakistan targeted Danny for kidnapping, and then they murdered him several weeks later during his captivity. So this is a story that goes back to 2002. We were searching and searching for him. And then fast forward almost 20 years, I'd say exactly 17 years, because my son was born that year and now he's 17. In the beginning of the pandemic, we got news from Pakistan that the 4 men that were convicted in Danny's murder were about to be freed. And so all of a sudden, sitting here in this house right here, I ended up, my son, now 17, going into the basement to get all the court documents that I'd had from the trial 17 years ago, bringing them upstairs, and then doing like exactly like what Trevor and I have learned to do, which is you just work the phones. Now we work WhatsApp. You do everything but WeChat in this instance. We are on Zoom. We're doing everything that you can to maintain the rapport and connection that you need to get a story and to get details. I was now doing text messages through WhatsApp because the sources were again back in Pakistan across an ocean. But I know for me, that's the international. And now on the local level, I've been reporting a story that's really playing out in Loudoun County also of a new movement to try to change the admissions policies at our STEM schools, like Thomas Jefferson High School. And it's the same thing again. I'm on WhatsApp, I'm on the phone, I'm Zooming with people. And so the thing that is different is our methods, I think, but the principle remains the same, which is making connections with people, building their trust, spending a lot of time with them to get to the facts and the details. And then maybe sometime in a sleepless moment, right, Trevor, you actually do the writing, because I think you're like me, where you wait till the last minute to do your writing too. So last night,
often than not.
Yeah. So last night I stayed up through the night to write a piece today about the Democratic National Convention and Kamala Harris and the story of her mother's immigration and the parallel with our parents and the challenges that we're facing today over these admissions changes. And all of that was everything that I do normally. That's our puppy here weighing in, saying, yeah, you kept me up all night too. So, you know, for me, the pandemic has meant actually being able to zero in on facts, like with kind of more precision, because we don't have long commutes and drives to get to people and get to documents, but it's still the same craft that we always have.
Yeah, and I almost kind of get a little nostalgic hearing about that information gathering and you can't even say shoe leather reporting anymore. I guess it's, I don't know what it is, finger reporting, text reporting anymore. But, in my role as editor, a huge chunk of my job is just coordination with our reporters. So we're a small newsroom, 5-person newsroom, and then a couple freelancers, although we've had to hit pause a bit on our freelance writers, and that is a result of the pandemic, unfortunately, just kind of the financial situation amid the pandemic. But like just about any industry, our world was completely tossed upside down, right side up, back upside down side. I mean, just all over the place. I actually feel like just now, probably over the past month or so, we've gotten in our groove and understood that this is how we're going to be working for the foreseeable future. So it's more, we're kind of getting back into a regular schedule and planning and forecasting a little better than we could for the first couple of months, because at that point it was just treading water and doing everything we possibly could just to get our paper out, to get several new stories up a day, and to cover this new pandemic that nobody's trained in, that there are so many unknowns. You have so many, literally endless facets to this story, whether it's education, whether it is the public health aspect of it, whether it's local government's response to it. So I think the pandemic, with some benefits that it did have, it forced us to do a few things that only something like this, only some unforeseen circumstance was going to force us to do. For instance, obviously, just producing a newspaper, producing the hard copy of the newspaper entirely remotely, holding our editorial meetings we use Teams, but whether it's Teams or Zoom, interviewing folks, as Asra said, interviewing folks and information gathering by phone, by text, by Teams calls, sending over the stories to our paginators, them getting everything on the page, them sending it to the printers. I mean, just the logistics of producing a newspaper are, and I don't even understand all of them, but I maybe understand half of it. And that half is more than I ever would have imagined, even just 5 years ago. So that, honestly, that is a benefit, was that it was going to take something like that for us to prove to ourselves that we could do this all remotely, because if we never were kind of pushed into the water, if you will, we never would have done it. And the other, another good example is we're about to launch a paywall, which we knew. So, 5 free stories a month, and then you have to subscribe, or I don't know exactly how we're going to work it out, but we're about to launch it. And this is nothing new. We've already announced this to our readers. But that's something that I think everybody in the back of our minds, we knew was coming, but we just were reluctant to do it because it was change, and change is hard, and change is scary. But the financial situation, so let's talk about the newspaper industry. Newspapers need money to survive. We make most of our money through local advertising. When local businesses are shut down and have no money, they understandably are holding on to their wallets. I can't blame anybody for not taking out local ads when they aren't in business and can't operate, whether it's local restaurants or just local businesses of any sort. So when the pandemic hit, we lost a huge chunk of our advertising. So that forces us to be a little more creative in how do we get new revenue streams. One of those, and not that this is a particularly novel idea, but implementing a paywall to where people, after so many free articles a month. They have to pay to get our coverage. And we think that's only right. But again, we've never, it's going to be a change for us and it's going to be a change for our readers. So it took something like this to almost force us to do it. So
that's really the economics, right? Like
exactly.
So, yeah. So, I mean, which is just like, because we don't oftentimes think, because this could easily be an aspect that many of you all could go into. You could end up owning a media outlet, you could end up, you might not even be the practitioner of it, but I think you're getting an insight into the fact that you got to pay the bills, right? And
and it's frustrating, at my core, I'm still reporter and journalist at heart and don't even want to think about dollars and cents.
Right.
But once you take on the role as editor, you do have to manage budgets and you have to stay in business. And journalism is newspapers, the media is very, very unique in that aspect of it's just a fabric of our daily lives. And people often don't think about the financial side of it. A newspaper just printing a newspaper is expensive. Paying our people is expensive. You need to have money coming in to have reporters sitting at city council meetings until 1 a.m, to have photographers out taking world-class pictures. They aren't going to do that for free. I'm not going to, like as Asra said, I'm not going to sit up all night to put together stories and to, produce a newspaper without getting a paycheck, modest as it may be,
Right.
So it is, I guess I'll real quick go off kind of on a tangent there, which would be to support your local newspaper, support your media outlet. Don't, whether it's a subscription, whether it's so many different media outlets do different things. Some of them you can just contribute. Here's a one-time donation. We of course like subscriptions and continued payment, but don't think news can always be free. It is, I think, kind of what we're trying to hammer into our audiences, because the fact is that like as Asra said, you just have to pay the bills sometimes.
Yeah, so that was some really interesting insight from both of our panelists about the pandemic and journalism. Like you said, zeroing in on facts, maintaining constant coordination and connection, as well as overcoming the financial difficulties. Yeah, I will definitely keep in mind to support my local newspapers. And so definitely 2020, the COVID-19 is a major challenge of 2020. And another major event that's coming up is the 2020 presidential election. So in your experience, how does an election year kind of change journalism or change your focus?
Well, how much are you all writing about the politics locally in Loudoun?
So we don't do, really just through our kind of the shrinking of our staff, we don't do very much national political coverage. And I say, I wish we did more. When I was reporting, we did do a little more. And when I was reporting in politics, we did do a little more. I covered both conventions 4 years ago. I went to both. I went straight from Cleveland to Philadelphia, and that was a blast of 2 weeks. That was so much fun.
Who were you working for then?
The Times-Mirror. I was here at the Loudoun Times-Mirror.
Oh, great. Okay, so they sent you.
How we would do that is we would maybe, take dispatches from our local delegates to the convention. We try to localize in that way. Does somebody have a personal tie to Kamala Harris? I know Joe Biden's wife was a professor at Nova. That could be a local hook to the story. So you're not going to see the reporting that the Post or the Wall Street Journal or somebody would be doing from a national take, but we will look for angles into a way to localize, the presidential election. But I'll let Asra speak to it.
Yeah. So, so here we are, sitting in Loudoun County or Fairfax County, Howard County, like, how does this national election trickle down to us, right? That's what I think, especially when we're talking at this level, that's what we're trying to understand, because we are where we're at. And I would argue that, like, every single person, like every single one of you has some intersection, right, with the 2020 election. Like, either maybe you'll get to vote for the first time this year, maybe, you know, but you are, one, you're one of the targets of their messaging, right? So you are a consumer of the political messages that are out there. And then you, as just being citizens of the county, the city, the state, the country, you get the impact, right, of public policy decisions. So I'm just going to use this little battle over admissions as an example. So for anybody who might not know, you know, there's been this debate at Thomas Jefferson High School about whether or not we need to make changes to the admissions policy so that we have more Blacks, Hispanics, and kids with lower socioeconomic means. So it's been a battle that's gone on for a long time, many years, since the beginning of the school's creation, and now it's expressed itself in Loudoun. There was a school board meeting last week that was followed minute by minute by hundreds of families who were invested in what was going to be happening with the results. So that's a politics story, right? And then all of the board members sitting there in Loudoun, for example, are going to be coming from a political party. Most of the time, people have run on a platform. And the same thing here in Fairfax County. We have a school board. They've all been affiliated with the political party. Now, the question about TJ admissions is at the governor level right now. So the governor of Virginia, Ralph Northam, has decided that he's going to task his education secretary with this mandate to fix this, quote, diversity problem. But what do we make of it? So here I am, I'm a mom and I'm a journalist. And I start hearing about this conversation that's happening in Richmond. Well, I pick up the phone and I call the Virginia Department of Education, because I think it's just like a policy story right now, right? Like, I just think it's a policy story. But what I find out is that it goes to the education secretary's office. And then when I call the education secretary, I get stonewalled, and I'm asked for the members of a task force that are supposed to decide this admissions policy. But they come back to me and they give me, Trevor knows this well, the vague answer, you know, the answer that doesn't answer any of your questions.
Fresh out of a can.
Yeah.
Something that they read over 7 times and said, yes, it's sterile enough right out of the can.
Yeah. And you love this, Trevor. Like, what are they thinking? They literally they send it to me at 5:06 p.m. on a Friday. Like, I'm like, you guys, we're all just sitting at home for coronavirus. Like, I have nothing better to do. I'm going to be working on the story at 5:07 p.m. on a Friday. Like, I'm not going, not to say anything inappropriate here, but to happy hour, you know, with like the folks from the newsroom. I'm going to be working on this story. So I get on the story and I'm like, hey, this is not appropriate. Like, this is not enough information. So then the Secretary of Education gives me the information that evening of the task force members, and then says, I'm going to get the minutes on Monday. So I'm just saying all of this because, you know, literally 20 emails later, right, and 10 phone calls later, I get some nuggets. But what I discovered then is that this is a political story, because the education secretary is appointed through a governor who's a political, you know, political officer of the party. And today's story that I wrote was about the fact that Asian Americans right now make up the highest percentage of racial minority in Loudoun and Fairfax counties. I don't know if you guys knew that, but the number is at about 19%, and we're the highest percentage. That's a big vote bank. And if you all remember the election from last year, it was a big victory for the Democrats because they won the state house. And so if you have And you guys know your parents. I don't need to tell you. If you have some angry parents who are worked up about the fact that their kids aren't going to get the educational opportunity that they were going to imagine, they might vote on it. So that was what my piece ended up being today, was just how Northam risks losing this important base in Northern Virginia that could have implications for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. Because you know our parents, right? We don't care that you came from India. If you're gonna not give our kids the same opportunities that you got in the 70s or 80s, we're not gonna vote for you. So that I'm just using that as an example where it began as just a straightforward, like what's going on with TJ admissions, and then it became a story connected to the national election. And you guys have like brilliant minds. I know you do. You know, you follow details, you're really linear minded. And that's so much of journalism, right, Trevor? It's like, okay, I go down this one rabbit hole, but then it takes me down into these other rabbit holes. And then you kind of like create a narrative too.
And as soon as you get repeated responses, as soon as you get repeated non-answer answers, after time, that is just such an alarm.
Yeah.
To where you say, well, now I know there, I wasn't sure that there was something here, but now that nobody wants to answer the questions, there's definitely something going on here.
Yeah. And when they start using vague words, strange words. And
when this all comes against kind of the backdrop of, the current climate in America and the heightened racial awareness.
Right.
And that is where, when you get into a presidential election year, for the most part, the utter chaos that we've seen for the better half of 2020, that changes our world. Nobody could have predicted that. Right. So whereas we may not have thought that that's what our news budget was going to look like all summer, covering statue removals, right. Covering protests, for or against the police, covering education, almost educational quota stories. Would have those happened if not for George Floyd, all of those, Arbery, Taylor, we can just rattle them off tragically. And I'll kind of segue into saying that is something that is so fascinating about this field is you can try, and you do need to try to plan a little bit, but week after week, you something new, many things new are going to come on your plate, and you're going to meet fascinating people. You're going to meet brilliant people. You're going to learn without realizing that you're learning. And you're going to learn a lot about a lot. You're going to become kind of very diverse in your knowledge set, is what I would say. So Jessica joined us. I'll take over the moderator.
I'm so sorry, everybody. But in typical journalistic fashion, I had been working on a breaking story and totally lost track of time. And probably like many people out there, balancing work and childcare during a pandemic. So things get out of hand.
Glad to have you here. I'll just jump in with one thought, which is just Trevor made me think about it, which is you're never going to know, like sometimes you don't know, you wake up and you don't know what the story is going to be, but there's just some principles that I always feel like you've got to nail. And it doesn't matter what the story is. One of them is always like understanding relationships between people, like how are people related to each other? I literally, for every story I do, I create a family tree. And yeah, that's my trick, because I'm a real visual person. So
I was going to say, that is detailed.
Like anything, it's just the way my brain works. Like I cannot understand until I understand the hierarchy and the relationships between people. And then the second thing is like understanding the geography. So like the other day I was writing about the Loudoun STEM school issue. So I was like, okay, where's Loudoun Academy of Science? Where's the Loudoun School Board physically located? And then you get a sense of the geography. But the third element, you all, is to always follow the money. Like that monument, like trashing, you know, it's trashing the monument is like a story just there, like who's trashing the monument. But then if you can at all figure out organizational affiliation, like who bust people in, if they did, I'm just saying if they did, like you don't know what the situation is in any circumstance. But like even on this TJ admission story, I'm looking at all the political contributions of every school board member, right? Because I want to know who's related to whom and what are the influences. And so those are just like the three things that I've always felt like you got to just hone in on those kind of elements of any story.
It's because that kind of concept has been around now for a while. It's become almost cliche, but there's a reason it's stuck around, because in story after, you know, in kind of beat after beat, it holds true, whether it's education. And I don't want to speak for Jessica, but I'm sure in kind of her world too, they're competing financial interests on kind of in the hospitality, in the restaurant industry.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I just had a big magazine feature about millennial aged restaurant investors, and kind of the premise of the story is, if you want to understand, you know, why the dining scene looks the way it does, you have to understand the investors and where they putting their money, and deciding what gets built. And then the premise of this story was, if you want to look into the future of the scene, look at kind of the young money, these millennial investors who are now funding some new projects.
Yeah, so I just wanted to introduce Miss Sidman for a little bit. I know she already talked a little bit about her work, about how she works in the food industry, but Ms. Sidman covers the people and trends behind DC's food and drink scene as food editor for the Washingtonian magazine. Previously, she was a food editor and Young and Hungry columnist at Washington City Paper, and she's a Colorado native and University of Pennsylvania graduate.
Thank you. And you can just call me Jessica. And also apologies again to everyone for being late.
So at this point, if any members in our audience have any questions or clarifications for our panelists, feel free to type them in the chat box. So from here, we're mostly going to be not taking our pre-curated questions, but ones in the chat box. So like straight away, there's a question from Jennifer, and it was, let me find it. It was, so what were your majors and minors in college? And so a lot of people say you shouldn't major in what you want, in the field you want to enter, because it's not practical. So especially for journalism, is it useful to get a writing related major or minor as like an aspiring writer?
Go ahead, Jessica. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I was an English major, which I feel like I was a terrible English major because if you ask me if I've read X, classic literature, oftentimes the answer is no. I personally am in the camp that it doesn't matter what your major is. I don't think you need to go to journalism school. I think what really matters is just your writing experience. And for me, that was being on the college newspaper and even my high school newspaper, and just doing internships. And at the end of the day, you'll get hired based on your work, your clips, not your college degree. And then these days, I mean, there are all these new routes. I mean, newsletters are very hot right now, or blogs. So there's lots of ways to kind of get that writing experience outside the traditional routes.
I think the parallel for all of us, if nobody picked up the first few minutes, and Jessica, you just emphasized it too, like we all did our high school newspaper. So it's such, like I remember my first scoop was my high school paper, the Red and Blue Journal at Morgantown High. And it was a school board battle. And the local paper picked up my scoop, and I was addicted by then, right? Like I was like, okay, I love the adrenaline of it, right? And then I too, like Jessica, and then you probably too, Trevor, did you work at your college paper too?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I worked there like from before I was even a freshman. And I went to West Virginia University, which is where my dad was teaching for my undergrad, because I was the good Asian kid who didn't get to go away from home. I lived at home too. I didn't get to live in the dorms. So this is like back in the 80s, right? You guys are big trendsetters now, and you get to go far away to like Charlottesville and things like that for college. But I stayed at home and I worked more at my college paper than I did on my college classes. And I loved it. Like we came out 4 days a week and I was writing every day, every other day. I like a lot of you, like I tested out of English, but I wish I'd taken it. Like I took the AP test and I wish I'd actually taken English class in college and like learned the actual art of writing. But then like Jessica was saying, like I just back then just worked the phones and started calling for summer internships and ended up every summer working an internship. And it is so true that the difference between a writer and an author is one less rejection, right? So getting published, and it doesn't matter. Like I so encourage you guys, like now you've met Trevor, like pitch him. I mean, annoy him and pitch him like the 300-word essay or the 500-word feature story. I'm sure he'd be happy to encourage a new generation of journalists.
You too, Asra. Anything you want to pitch the time here, we'd love to have you.
I've already got it. I'm so excited. I ended up getting what we call the football player degree because I jumped around so many degrees undergrad, and it's called liberal studies at Morgantown at West Virginia University. And then I went on to get a degree in international communications from AU, but I only did it to get 2 years in DC so I could intern somewhere. So I was just buying myself time, but definitely like one thing I wanted to emphasize with all of you is you may not even become professional journalists, but like no matter what field you go into, for sure learn the art of communication. You know, learn how to cut a 3-minute video, learn how to do a podcast, the technical side of it, learn how to write a 500-word sweet, tight article or op-ed, because whether you're like a school teacher or a physician, you're going to one day want to influence public policy. I'm sure you are, and you're going to want to be able to like craft your message really well. So learn, no matter whether you go into the field or not, you're going to learn such great skills on just being precise and convincing and persuasive. And I cannot emphasize enough, the only thing that I think is valuable to study, and you could do it at Nova, literally, like, and I look at my ACE, you know, adult learning booklet that we get in the mail here, and I want to take like all the multimedia classes that they've got, because being able to cut in Adobe a video that's like actually sharp and convincing is pretty good, even as a journalist or as a citizen, to be able to get your story out. So I'm pretty, I got pretty mad skills on Canva now, this graphic package, and I get my son to do my Adobe graphics for me. But you know, all that multimedia is a part of being a communicator now, I think. So whether you learn it in the classroom or in life, like be sure that you learn communication skills.
Yeah, I do. I'll kind of piggyback on that. I think she almost kind of unwittingly touches on the benefits, the joys of journalism, which is continued learning. I mean, if you are a reporter, if you are in the journalism or in the news field, you are going to be learning something new every day and talking to fascinating, talented people that can teach you something. And on the point of communication, that's if you have strong communication skills, you can change careers 15 times, and those skills will always transfer over and benefit you. It is remarkable if I get an email from somebody who has nothing to do in the media field or in the writing field or in the teaching field, just some general some general business field. And if I get a well-crafted email, you know, we take note of that. Like, this is somebody that I'm going to look forward to engaging with strictly because of their ability to craft a sentence. So don't take writing for granted. It really, I bet you, Jessica and Asra, you probably perhaps feel this way. I really never thought it was a skill to boast about. But then you get into the professional world,
Yes.
and I hate to say it, but you see some of these emails from folks.
Oh my gosh.
And successful people, you know, people that are doing really important things, and you're like, what is this supposed to say?
Yeah.
So don't take for granted your ability to, you know, craft a good pitch or craft a good email, or just with the organization that you're doing with Veritas and with BranchOut here.
Right.
Just crafting the evites and crafting the website and everything, that reflects tremendously on you guys, just putting together, you know, a nice pitch for folks.
Yeah, agreed completely.
All right, so those are all very good points, and of course communication is really important. So our next question is from Hillary. It says, can you speak a little bit about being credible and neutral with sources despite having personal bias on stories? And why are some sources extremely polarized and some are neutral?
I'll jump in because I love that question, and you know, we get it frequently. I honestly, I partially feel like I am blessed in that this is an easy answer for me. My since kind of formulating my opinions on this, it's really easy. You know, of course, we're human. We all have our personal biases. We all have our personal views and leanings and different perspectives and experiences that have kind of led us to where we are. But if we care, and I certainly can, you know, in just 5 minutes chatting with Asra and Jessica as well, you know, we're clearly passionate about the cause of journalism, about the role the Fourth Estate plays in our world. You know, there's a reason that it's in our First Amendment, freedom of expression, freedom of the press. It is essential to our democracy. So if you remember that as a news editor, if I remember that and am so passionate about journalism, then whatever little dinky thought I have on this issue or this politician or this view is I'm kind of knocking myself. My view on that is so insignificant to the greater cause of journalism that I would never want to let that infringe and get in the way of, so let's say I do, you know, inject myself into a story, a straight news story. Well, then we lose credibility. It taints journalism overall, which you are seeing, you know, across the board these days. And if you just kind of keep in mind how important it is and how much you cherish the work you do, then you don't even think about letting your personal thoughts get into something because you want the institution to survive.
So I have a little bit of a different perspective on this, being both a critic sometimes and a reporter sometimes. You know, so my main role is not writing restaurant reviews, but it is something that I do help with from time to time. And then I'm also writing news, and those things sometimes are at odds with each other, which is interesting. And I think also, you know, the newspaper world is very different from the magazine world, where you're really encouraged to have a voice and use more opinion sometimes than you would in a straight news story. Of course, it depends what you're writing. So, you know, I often describe myself more as like a reporter who sometimes has opinions. And I do think, though, I mean, for, you know, there is straight news, and that's, you know, what Trevor's talking about. But I do think a lot of journalism is kind of going into this other area that is commentary, analysis, and news, where, you know, as a writer, you are encouraged to show a little bit of your own personal perspective. And so I think, you know, part of it is just being a little bit upfront about that, and usually readers can tell, but more and more, you know, I find myself being asked to interject, actually being encouraged to, you know, like have a little bit more of an opinion or a take. My editor loves a good take, you know, so.
Usually the reader can, that's the problem, is I do feel like media literacy needs to be taught
That's
on
true.
occasion, because a lot of times people will, I mean, I'll get emails back on editorials
Right.
that are saying, how dare you say this? I thought how can anybody trust the news? It says right there, our view. It says opinion and commentary. Nobody's pitching this as a straight news story. So it can be very frustrating. You just wish
very
people
murky, and especially seeing more less straight news, it makes it even trickier to navigate sometimes.
So just like on that, that's a great concept of media literacy, you know, and just to like lay it out for you all, just as participants. So Trevor is an editor, right? Overseeing, I guess, news and the editorial side, right, Trevor? Yeah. So the news side is exactly what Jessica is talking about. It's supposed to be the straight, he said, she said, no interjection of the reporter's voice. And then the editorial side, which is where columns and essays and op-eds run, are the ones where you can have a point of view. And so I'll just use myself as an example, is that at the Wall Street Journal, I covered corporate America for 15 years and never used the I word, right? Because it's a taboo, like you don't bring yourself into it. But then what happened for me is that after the 9/11 attacks, I ended up having a point of view on the issue of terrorism. And so I moved from the news side to the opinion page. So for example, my first break was on the section in the Washington Post. It's called the Outlook section, and it's only on Sundays, and they'll have like essays from 1,100 words to 1,500 words. And that was such a departure for me from the career that I'd had. So it was almost like I was reborn into another profession, really. And I feel like once you cross that path, like once you make that cross, it's sacred, and it's very difficult to go back to being a straight news reporter. But what Jessica is talking about is a crisis that we really do have in journalism today. For somebody from my perspective, that's just old school. When we did consider ourselves like gumshoe reporters, and tearing holes in the bottoms of our shoes, working stories. And from the New York Times to the Washington Post, we have activism happening on the news pages. I'll just say that as my point of view. And that's troubling to me because we see it expressing itself on social media. So you see me on social media and I've got quite a number of points of view, but that's because I've crossed that line that Jessica's talking about and Trevor's talking about. But that's in your media literacy, just like always, like analyze like what the writer is doing, and so that you also are a critical thinker as you're consuming whatever they've put forward. And also like videos, like you always gotta, like I always look at the credits at the end. I ended up, some of these companies, you don't even know who owns them. So I'm always following the money and trying to see like who started this like slick little video company that's posting videos on Facebook all the time now. So stay sharp with every.
Know the source, investigate your source.
Yeah.
And I, there's a role for commentary. I have no problem with that, as long as they're clearly marked as such. Yeah. What is frustrating, exactly what Asra is saying. Sure, I respect the hell out of the Post and their journalists, but you do, when they do start to shy away on A1 of a news story, into something that may seem potentially slanted or biased, that kind of gets into where you lose people and the general distrust of the media. So don't try to play both sides. Be what you are and advertise yourself as such. And that, I really am not trying to knock any one outlet, but I do think, like you say, kind of active consumers of some of these outlets do recognize the shift from year to year or 5 years to 5 years. So I kind of feel more comfortable with Asra saying that than myself. But it has nothing to do with whatever our personal opinions are. It's just from kind of an old school mentality of this is a straight news story, but I don't feel like, but I definitely feel like it's, angled to make a statement, make a point of view.
So I know we're at time, but since we started a bit late, there's one more question that I'd really like to hear the answer to. Is you guys touched upon how when you write, there's a perfectionist mindset before you send out your story, and just in general for writers, when you're writing, it's really hard to let go of that paragraph and making sure it's really good. So how do you guys deal with that, especially as journalists, where you have to let go and publish the story and deal with that perfectionist mindset?
That's such a hard question.
Yeah, I had a hunch Jessica would like to answer that one.
I have perfectionist tendencies, and that's something especially early in my career that I really struggled with, because I would get so stressed out if something wasn't perfect.
That's why you're at Washingtonian, Jessica.
And now, yeah. Well, I mean, no, I don't. I would say that I've actually become less of a perfectionist, which is in fact a good thing. And the cure for me was just having to write a lot and having constant deadlines, because when you're forced to be constantly cranking out content, my last job, I had to write 2 blog posts every day, plus a 1,500 word feature once a week, plus regular cover stories and other projects. And so it was really intense. And at a certain point, you just have to tell yourself, not every story is going to be perfect. Not every story is going to be a home run. You have to pick and choose. Some you just have to get done. I hate to say it. Maybe this is bad advice, but when you have to turn out content, which is the case at a lot of media publications now, pick and choose what your winners are going to be and what you can, get by with still being accurate. Right?
And I'm going to kind of give a plug here for Asra of, you've done so much investigative journalism absolutely tragically, that is something that has been getting sliced and diced for the past, ever since kind of the alteration to digital media. Investigative departments have been some of the first things to go, and it is an absolute tragedy. While at the same time, you kind of understand where I'm not condoning it, but you almost understand where the money men and money women are coming from, in that, I did, of course, one of my favorite movies is Spotlight. And there's that scene there where they talk about, well, how long do you poke around and try to land on a story? And they say something like, a couple months. So all the editor or all of the people who sign the paychecks are doing, all they hear is, so you're telling me for 3 months I'm not going to see a byline from you, for 3 months I'm not going to see any public product from you. But the other side of that is, to use the Spotlight example, look at what their work led to, look at the impact that their work did. And investigative, it's such a shame. So it gets back to the money thing of support your local newspapers, because they need money to fund people who can dig and dig and dig and just commit themselves, embed themselves to a story for a month that nobody else is willing to do.
Yeah, I just can't even begin to tell you that how the skills of being investigative. You know, going back to Jessica, before you were here, I just said that Nancy Drew is what inspired me into journalism. And that's where, you know, at the very end of what Jessica was saying, she said, just be sure you get the facts straight, because you may have to churn it out, but you cannot make mistakes. Like, that's what's fundamental. So sometimes when you write, you got to fudge. That's what we say. You got to just fudge it and write around things, write around what you know. You can never overreach in what you're alleging or what you're trying to state. But the thing is with the writing, and I'm will always obsess over the reporting. I never put enough time in the writing, but I definitely, you know, I stayed up all last night because that's how I can write, in the quiet of the night when there's less emails coming in. But what I knew is like by morning, I wanted to get this piece done. And I just needed, it's what you guys learned in kindergarten, beginning, middle, end. You know, you just have to have a narrative arc. Like, every story can be the hero's journey. It can be the, this was known and then that was known, the chronological, you know, the narrative is so important for the reader to be able to grasp what you're trying to share. So at a minimum, like, get that down. And then, like, because of deadlines, because you have to publish in order to actually do this work, you have to push the button. You know, you have to let go of it. But the curiosity for the truth and for telling the story can stay with you, so that, who knows, 5 years later, you may pick up a story, you may pick up a thread. You know, you never know. So you have to, I think Trevor earlier, he said, you know, it's like, the beauty about journalism is you're like always learning, and I have every notebook is back there on that section. That's my section of my writing and my notebooks. And I keep it because I never know when I'm going to go back to some interview and find that little nugget. So let it go for the moment, but know that, you know, you have a lifetime of work that you can produce.
Yeah,
and
I just real quick want to follow up on that. And I love that she's kind of hit so much on like these foundational aspects of journalism that I haven't had to, but I will just kind of like to emphasize, she talks about, you know, facts, have the facts right, sourcing, you know, have good sourcing, good communication skills. I mean, these are things that there is no substitute for. If you want to be a reporter, you want to be a journalist, you want to be an editor, like, you can't gloss over facts. You can't gloss over details. You can't take a sentence and say, I'm not, you know, I'm about 80% sure. I think I'm good on that. If you have that pause, you better stop the story right now and go and look it up. You know, I've dealt in my career with people who are good reporters, and that's their strong suit. And then their stories, they work, but their stories don't sing. And then you have folks who are great reporters and great writers. That's when it's really beautiful. You have people that just love crafting a beautiful story. Maybe it's not the most impactful story. You know, maybe it's not, you know, some political scandal story that impacts people's daily lives, but it's just a beautiful story. And that's awesome too. I mean, I'm a huge fan of, like, if my ideal night is just sitting out, like, you know, reading a Vanity Fair or reading a Washingtonian, just because the writing is so damn good. But that's different from newspaper writing and kind of, you know, again, that shoe leather reporting. So if you guys want to do it, yeah, you can't, the facts and the truth and accuracy, there's no substitute for that if you want to go into this field.
And one other element that I would just add, the emotional element, is that fear. Like, everybody is sometimes afraid to talk to someone and pick up the phone to ask the question. It may be uncomfortable, but each time you do it, and you have to practice at home, maybe you interview your mom about her childhood and some uncomfortable moment that she had. Let's all put our moms on the spot. But you practice in every part of your life so that you're not hamstrung and handcuffed by fear of getting that knowledge, getting that information, putting those words down, because remember, you're going to put it down next to your name. And so you have to overcome that fear every day. And I'm sure Trevor and, Jessica, even in our professions, like every day we're still overcoming fear. Every day it gets, right? Don't you, Jessica? You're shaking your head, right? Yeah.
I still get nervous for interviews all the time. So and I've been doing this for a really long time now, so it doesn't go away necessarily.
If you guys find yourself in the newsroom on, your first day in the newsroom, oh my, yeah, I mean, that kind of like brings back chills when Asra says it. The first time you're in a crowded newsroom with people you've literally never met before, and you just have to pick up the phone and call a stranger, terrifying. That is terrifying, but it gets easier with each day. So.
Yeah, and it's a skill that's going to stay with you forever, so make sure that you take that extra second, and you're not going to the store as much nowadays, but from a distance, even ask the store clerk and take a minute to ask an extra question that you don't have to ask. Make yourself, push yourself out of the boundaries of where you would normally box yourself, so that you cross those boundaries for other people one day.
Yeah, that was really insightful, kind of talking about how to deal with perfectionism while still maintaining accuracy, like crafting a story and coming back to a story and kind of pushing yourself out of the comfort zone. I feel like I really learned a lot from you guys today. Unfortunately, that would be all the time we have tonight for questions. On behalf of the entire BranchOut career panel team, we hope that everybody has enjoyed the panel this evening and learned a great deal about successful individuals in the journalism industry. We hope that everybody got a chance to experience the essence of the field, had their questions answered, and maybe even be inspired to pursue or learn more about this industry. The journalism industry has been a vital part of our daily lives and will continue to be for generations to come. We also are extremely appreciative of our panelists, Mr. Baratko, Ms. Sidman, and Ms. Normani, for their time and giving us such great insight into the field. We are also very appreciative of our audience members for making this panel so great and asking some wonderful questions. Thank you all. To learn more about BranchOut and our future panels, please check us out at thebranchout.org or like us on Facebook or Veritas Education Leaders.
We also have our last signature speaker event coming up next Friday, August 28th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time on literacy development during COVID-19. The presenter is Dr. Susan Newman, an NYU professor and former Assistant Secretary of Education. This is a very rare opportunity and you are all invited. I will send a link in the chat for the registration form. Thank you guys all for coming, and we look forward to seeing you guys at our next event.
Thank you guys.
Thank you for having us. Great job.
Fun.
Great job, guys.
Emily, Dayton, and Jessica.
It was really cool to talk to you guys.